And now, a passage from Canton and Salem, The Impact of Chinese Culture Upon New England Life During the Post-Revolutionary Era, by Ping Chia Kuo. Our Eastern commerce, the glory of the past, has spread its white wings and sailed away forever. Its history alone remains to us. May it soon find a chronicler worthy of so rich a subject. R.S. Rantoul, The Port of Salem. For 2 centuries after the first settlement of America, a voyage from New England to the nearest European coast took no less than 4 weeks. The countries in the Far East were, naturally, looked upon as being distant, as were the Pillars of Hercules to the ancient Greeks. Nevertheless, scarcely was the Revolutionary War in America over than a host of merchants and sailors, zealous to extend their empire of trade, began to make the first experiments in trading with the Orient. Soon an active trade arose between Salem, then a nursery of seafaring youths, and Canton, in southern China, to which every son of Namkeg now looks back with pride. In the half-century following the voyage of the Grand Turk in 1785-6, the first Salem ship to visit China, no less than 34 vessels entered the port of Salem, richly laden with cargoes from distant Cathay. An approximate vision of the scene may be imagined from the lines of William Wetmore's story. Ah me, how many an autumn day we watched with palpitating breast some stately ship from India or Cathay, laden with spicy odors from the east, come sailing up the bay. If it stimulated great enthusiasm, as it certainly did among the merchant class of Salem, this trade was of even greater consequence in spreading Chinese culture into the heart of old New England. The commodities ordered by merchants, the curios and furniture brought home by sailors, and the customs and ideas reported by these early adventurers united to make a deep impression upon the life of these early Americans. Important contributions were made to their diet and beverages, to their costumes and tables, to their furniture and ornaments, and some of the loftiest forms of Chinese culture touched their minds. Not only was the dullness of Puritan life somewhat relieved, but the mental horizon of the American people was greatly widened. In influence as well as in quantity, tea occupied a position of paramount importance among the objects that were carried from China to Salem. On the brief list of articles by which China had already won a renown in America, none was so important as tea. But what had been formerly shipped over by the East India Company or smuggled in by Dutch traders was now supplied directly. If in pre-revolutionary days the parliamentary duty had discouraged the drinking of tea, the beverage received a happier welcome after the conclusion of the peace treaty. In June 1786, choice bohea tea, equal to a great deal that is called Souchong, was sold by Vance's shop in Salem. In the year following, there was on sale in John Fisk's store, on the Long Wharf, Salem, bohea tea, of an excellent quality in chests, half-chests, and quarter-chests. The assumption of Mr. Singleton that in 1790 the Astrea was the first to bring home a cargo of tea in an American bottom is unwarranted, for when the Grand Turk sailed back in 1786, she was laden with $17,510 worth of bohea tea, $95 of hyson, and $521 of Souchong. The demand for it was also increasing. In 1790, 4 ships imported a total of 747,853 pounds of many varieties: bohea, hyson, hyson skin, Souchong, green, imperial, and gunpowder. A sale of 10 or 12 chests a day was already considered few. On April 7, 1791, the Reverend William Bentley recorded in his diary, "The 3rd day was of sales upon the wharf, raisins, teas, etc. The sales of tea were few, about 12 chests of bohea." After the last decade of the century, no store was enterprising that did not advertise India goods, under which title all Chinese goods were included, and no advertisement of India goods commanded greater attention than that of tea. On September 29, 1797, announcement was made of the sale at Crown and Shields Wharf of 45 chests and 40 quarter chests of bohea tea and 10 chests of hyson tea. In the next year, John Danold's store on Washington Street issued announcements of tea in large and attractive type. 2 years later, the teas that came from one cargo were on sale in different stores. This importation and spread of enormous amounts of tea greatly affected the diet of the Americans. Its delicious fragrance and stimulating effect made it not merely a delightful drink, but a necessity. To the tedious list of badly cooked foods of the early New Englanders, it supplied balance and variety. But it gave rise to more significant issues. Towards the close of the century, the widespread habit of drinking hard liquors was beginning to arouse opposition. By 1813, there was a clamor for temperance, and its champions eagerly proclaimed the virtues of the Chinese beverage as a substitute for ardent spirits. Thus, Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of the foremost physicians of the day, wrote, "Men who follow professions which require constant exercise of the faculties of their minds are very apt to seek relief by the use of ardent spirits. To such persons, it may be a discovery to know that tea is a much better remedy for that purpose. By its grateful and gentle stimulus, it removes fatigue, restores the excitement of the mind, and invigorates the whole system." The late Anthony Benezet, one of the most laborious schoolmasters I ever knew, informed me he has been prevented from the love of spirituous liquors by acquiring a love for tea in early life. This worthy man lived to be 71 years of age and died of an acute disease with the full exercise of all the faculties of his mind, but the use of tea counteracts a desire for distilled spirits during great bodily as well as mental exertions. Of this, Captain Forrest has furnished us with a recent and remarkable proof in his history of a voyage from Calcutta to the Marquis Archipelago. "I have always observed," says this ingenious mariner, "when sailors drink tea, it weans them from the thoughts of drinking strong liquors and pernicious grog, and with this they are soon contented. Not so with whatever will intoxicate, be it what it will. This has always been my remark. I therefore always encourage it without their knowing why." Thus, China not only contributed to the list of American beverages, but helped the hope for prohibition at its very beginning. Lesser contributions to the American diet were made by China in the introduction of cassia and sugar candies, being barks or buds of cinnamon. With its unique flourishing odors, cassia was one of the few choicest spices of southern China. The cargo of the Grand Turk in 1786 contained 130 chests of cassia and 10 of cassia bud. On December 27, 1797, John Dutch had for sale at his office a few bales of cassia. On May 1st, 1801, 18,503 pounds of cassia were landed from the ship Hunter. Again, on May 27, 1812, 6,759 pounds were imported by the brig Acteur. And on April 1st, 1818, 6,762 pounds by the ship China. No less important than cassia was sugar candy. Thus, among many instances, 28 pounds of sugar candy were shipped to Salem on June 18, 1799 by the Elizabeth, and on July 7th, in the next year, 85 pounds by the Pallas, which loaded a huge cargo of tea. Another important dietary contribution, pepper, was shipped to Salem in enormous quantities from Sumatra and occasionally from Java. On March 28, 1797, Joshua Phippen was instructed by Elias Haskett Derby, Esquire, to supply him with 106 hogsheads of pepper at 11 shillings and 1 tierce at 9 shillings. During the closing years of the 18th century and the first quarter of the 19th, its importation reached surprising proportions. Ships from Sumatra were laden almost invariably with pepper and coffee. The brig Raja, for instance, in 1800, landed 147,776 pounds of pepper and 1,438 pounds of coffee. Of the two, however, pepper had by far the greater importance. On July 30th, 1801, large quantities were on sale at George Crowninshield and Sons in Salem and at Thomas K. Jones in Boston, being the cargo of the ship Belisarius. Captain Scarry just arrived from Bencoolen. After a few months in October, the America imported from Muka in Sumatra 845,228 pounds of this spice, which was advertised for sale in the Salem Impartial Register on November 9th, 1801. Towards the end of 1811, the cargo of the Hope from Sumatra was exclusively pepper, estimated at 544,468 pounds in all and intended for 10 consignees. In February 1832, Joseph Peabody also shipped to Antwerp by the brig Mexican John G. Buttman, master, 455,980 pounds of Sumatra pepper worth $25,078.90. If the name of China was made familiar to the American people by the introduction of tea and other edibles, her influence was felt even more strikingly in clothing. Along with large chests of teas and peppers, nankeens were among the favored objects the early sailors to China brought back to their country. What were at first carried home as curios to please their wives and friends, soon assumed the importance of a regular commodity. By the brig Hope, which entered Salem in early February 1790, George Dodge ordered $198.89 worth of nankeens, while it was to the wealthy Benjamin Hodges that $1,352.40 of the cloth was consigned. But a few months later, on the ship Astrea, which entered the port on June 5th, the total amount of nankeens carried was estimated at as much as $16,014. This influx of nankeens opened a new epoch in the history of American clothing. With its unique yellow, at once bright and serene, nankeen lent no little charm to the apparel of New England women. The most fashionable jackets and trousers were made of this cloth, named from Nanking. Not only could a lady find in John Scobie's store at the corner of Elm and Newbury Streets a great variety of striped, clouded, and yellow nankeens, but shopping at the frequent auctions at William Lang's office on Essex Street, she could pick up as much of it as she wanted at much lower prices out of the heaps of Indian clothes. A more elegant stuff that took the women by storm was the so-called crêpe de Chine. Made of soft oriental silk, it was exceedingly smooth and gauzy to transparency. It was only occasionally offered at public vendue, for while its beauty was captivating, it was imported much less than the nankeens, and what was imported was mainly on order of rich merchants or in the shape of private ventures of sailors. The beauty of the nankeens and crepes having aroused a thirst for the splendor of the East, further explorations were made into the storehouse of Chinese wares. Among other innovations, Chinese shoes and handkerchiefs were notable. The ship Concord carried to Salem on July 19, 1802, 93 pairs women's shoes other than silk, and in May 1810, the Hunter, 39 pairs shoes. Notices of Chinese handkerchiefs were more abundant. On February 22, 1791, at the store of that greatest of Salem merchants, Elias Haskett Derby, there was for sale a quantity of China silk handkerchiefs, being the cargo of the brig Henry. On June 18, 1801, John Scobie announced that he had for sale at his store China handkerchiefs. It was the Salem Register that published on January 14, 1802, the following advertisement. Next Tuesday at X o'clock at William Lang, Jr.'s office, Front Street, a large assortment of valuable and seasonable goods for sale, viz. 200 pieces China and bandeau handkerchiefs, China satins. In the advertisements in the newspapers, handkerchiefs occupied a place no less conspicuous than muslins or calicos from India. But perhaps more important than anything except nankeen itself was the cloth known as gingham. Specimens of it can be seen in the Museum of the Essex Institute in Salem. Made of cotton and usually woven in intercrossing white and blue stripes, it was a material new to the Americans. Shortly after its introduction, it became so popular among the mass of people that some even learned to manufacture it themselves. At once cheap and strong, it was soon widely used as the chief stuff for the dresses of country folk who could not afford the luxurious crepes or nankeens. By 1800, at least, the manufacture of ginghams had become one of the common industries of places like Ware, New Hampshire. It was, however, in its finer aspects that Chinese culture was felt best. The porcelain wares that distinguished the name of China in the civilization of the world were imported in large quantities, thus inaugurating a reform in the table furnishings of many a New England family. The rude wooden ware of early colonial days had already been displaced by Dutch pewter, but even Dutch pewter seemed destitute of refinement to discerning eyes. Later improvement was wrought by the introduction of the Delftware made by the Dutch in imitation of Chinese patterns, which, with their whites and browns, enjoyed immense popularity in the 50 years from 1675 to 1725. By the middle of the century, New Englanders also knew, through importation from Holland, the genuine Chinese ware usually known as Old India China, originally purchased by Europeans through India. There are plates of this kind in the de Witt-Clark family, which were imported from Holland about 1760. But it was not until the direct trade with China had begun that large quantities of Chinaware were carried to America. In the splendid galaxy of divergent fashions, the Oriental Lowestoft, with its unique bluish-white and somewhat hybrid taste, appealed most strongly to Americans. The Canton and Nanking wares were noted for their mountain and water design in center and lattice work on borders. The Mandarin China was strong in colors, notably the bombard golden green, and the Fitzhugh and willow patterns were largely made in chin to chen, hence sharing most fully the orthodox spirit of Chinese porcelain. The improvement effected in the appearance of the table was phenomenal, standing preeminent in its picturesqueness and grace. Chinese pottery almost wholly displaced all other wares, whether metal, leather, or glass. Every ship that sailed to Canton was expected to bring home some pieces of china in her return cargo. The Grand Turk in 1786 brought back 75 boxes of china valued at $1,923 and 6 other boxes at $135. Before leaving Canton, Captain E. West was presented with a large china bowl by a famous Canton merchant named Ping Chia. To their surprise, they found it was beautifully decorated with a painting of the Grand Turk under full sail and bore the inscription "Ship Grand Turk at Canton, 1786. This masterpiece of china, still to be seen in the East India Marine Museum in the Peabody Museum in Salem, aroused the great admiration of Elias Haskett Derby, and indeed of every citizen of the town. The practice thus begun, large quantities of china were imported and quickly offered at public vendue. 13 consignments were carried by the Astrea in 1789-90. The Light Horse in 1790 landed indeed only $124.80 worth of china, but on April 28, 1798, $2,413.94 of it was shipped by the Perseverance. The great ship owner, Billy Gray, sold many a hogshead of chinaware from the cargoes of his great ships. In the opulent house of Elias Haskett Derby, almost every corner was adorned with Chinese pottery, while one closet contained china estimated as worth $371. It soon became the vogue for men of means to celebrate their wedlock with beautiful collections of chinaware. In the wedding of Jabez and Anne Baldwin in 1804, there was a priceless outfit of Chinese tureens and plates. When Sally, the daughter of the third Nathaniel Ropes, married Joseph Orne, son of William Orne, the East India merchant, in 1817, the elder Orne fitted their dowry with Oriental Lowestofts, tea chests, Chinese jars, etc. On opening the china closet, what a treasure greeted the young bride's eyes. The deeply blue, translucent porcelain of the East in the Nanking pattern was stacked high upon the shelves, 30 platters of all sizes, a half-dozen tureens, small covered cups for warm desserts, hot water plates to serve meats delectably, covered vegetable dishes with a separate compartment for hot water, soup, and dinner and tea plates by the dozens, and many little teacups in the handleless Eastern fashion. There can, of course, be no doubt that many pieces were badly wrought, nor did they represent the true spirit of Chinese porcelain, for much of it, such as the Oriental Lowestoft, was made to suit the taste of the American merchants. But more refined pieces were by no means lacking. The bowl given to the Grand Turk, mentioned above, a plate made in China about 1800 for the ship Friendship, and a pair of large tureens received by the East India Marine Society in 1803 from Canton to use at its dinners, all of which can now be seen in the East India Marine Museum, represent a superb art hardly yet superseded. The love of the New Englanders for China was so great that it soon became a mania. The country folk loved to dub every piece Chinese, for pottery from Cathay was a passport of breeding, and they were openly indignant if one pointed out its undeniable Coughley or Staffordshire marks. Even greater, perhaps, was the passion of the women for beautiful china. Despite their limited resources, they never spared any sacrifice to send money for a few teacups, pitchers, or bowls. While teacups, bowls, plates, and other chinawares were thus enriching the table and the imagination, American furniture was also affected by China. Rambling in the treasury of ancient relics in the Essex Institute, one is struck, for example, by the sight of 1 or 2 portable desks made of camphor wood with secret drawers. They are only specimens of the great numbers of their kind which were carried to America during those early days. Nor could anyone now tell the stories of the more numerous sea chests which were brought to America from China by sea captains, a few of which can still be seen in the East India Marine Museum. With a small compartment at the right end of the chest to protect valuable notes or bills, these chests represented the typical Chinese construction formerly unknown to Americans.